Now on for a trip to China to ride the Manchuria Express.
The railways of China have long captivated writer Maggy Whitehouse. She's recently published a book on these splendid leviathans of the age of steam.
For as long as I can remember, I've been in love with the glory of steam. I was brought up in a household of steam fanatics. My father founded the Birmingham Railway Museum, and my mother and I used to say we knew every station waiting room in Europe. Ning Fang has been my friend and interpreter on my 4 previous visits here. She works for the China Railway Publishing Corporation, which is responsible for timetables, maps and other railway literature. China is a country slightly larger than the United States of America, but it only has 150 miles of first-class roads, which makes the railways vital. I love this bit, you know. Actually fascinating.
Yes, I remember when the first time I saw the turntable working. I couldn't understand how it worked, but I thought it was exciting.
You'd never be allowed to walk like this in England, you know. Never, just never. It's sort of like being a little kid again, sort of bouncing along on the girders. On this trip, we're starting from Beijing, travelling north to the last imperial capital, Changchun in Manchuria, and on to Langshan, near China's border with the USSR. Beijing, until recently called Peking, home to 10 million Chinese, nearly all with their own bicycles. Here, there are very few privately owned cars, yet they still manage to average 600 road accidents a month. It wouldn't be hard to become one of the statistics. Until the turn of the century, the pace of life was dictated by how fast you walked, or, for the rich, how far a horse could travel in a day. Then the bicycle and the steam engine arrived, and in China, they've never left. The tones of The East is Red, chiming the hour, welcome travellers to Beijing's main station. The Chinese believe you can never be too early, and hundreds wait patiently every day on the station forecourt. They're not allowed inside until 1 hour before their train leaves. Tickets go on sale only 3 days before departure, and they're often sold out almost at once. Tricky if you don't plan ahead. And added problems for big noses, as we foreigners are sometimes called. My ticket costs 70% more than Ning Fang's, simply because I'm not Chinese.
列车组同志推客人的同志，请到第4站台接28次列车。平壤甘东开到北京的28次列车快要到达北京。列车第4。
Just time for a wash and brush up. Oh, it's not exactly the Ritz.
I'm trying to have a bell. That's from the hotel with me, I mean.
Stations are always crowded. The old days when the Chinese were not allowed to travel are long gone.
It's always like this. Not scary. Well, I suppose maybe it's slightly worse at the moment because of National Day. I presume most of the people would like to go home before they... Well, some lot of family gather together occasion.
All that limits people now is time, when most cities are an overnight journey apart, and except for national holidays, most Chinese have only one day off a week. The tapes are up and we're off. There's always a race onto the station platforms, as no one is allowed out of the waiting rooms until the train arrives. You can travel first, second or third class on Chinese railways. The best is soft class, where you get white linen covered bunks. Second class has no frills and no privacy, and the third or hard class has no beds at all. Up to 40 million people use Beijing Station every year, catching one of 150 daily trains across the length and breadth of China. In China, supposedly a classless society, everyone looks down on everyone else. The farmers look down on city dwellers and students for their lack of prosperity, but they in turn look down on the peasants, as they call the farmers, for their disgusting manners, saying they should travel hard class if they're to be allowed the luxury of travel at all. We chose the middle course, hard class lying. Every train supplies thermos flasks of boiling water from a coal stove, so passengers can relax and make tea.
Only in the city you always have milk. We don't have milk here, so.
This is the buffet, a far cry from British Rail. Packs of meat, vegetables and rice and cans of fizzy drinks. But woe betide the passenger buying a drink from here and taking it into the dining car. There's strict demarcation between the two. In the dining car, I've always found the cheaper set meal is best, guaranteed fresh and less likely to feature such horrors as sea cucumber, jellyfish, chicken heads or duck's feet.
Time I came to Changchun on the train, I had toffee apples, you know, so you can get in the Chinese restaurant at home. Except I didn't know they were apples. I didn't know what was inside them.
It must be different from the English toffee apples.
Oh yes,
very
yes,
different.
vastly different. And I thought, she's very nearly very nice, but not quite.
Did you try it? In the end, you did.
Very few people here travel solely for pleasure. Even now, no one in China has the leisure or freedom of the foreign tourist. Most passengers are traders, work unit delegates on business, or farmers who are taking wares for sale. But it's still only the minority that use the trains. And so to bed, stacked 3 high and 60 bunks per carriage. The Chinese are not used to privacy, and travelling hard class is one of the best ways to meet the Chinese people. Keeping yourself to yourself is virtually impossible in these conditions. Everyone wants to know their neighbour's business. Foreigners are different. They're probably mad.
So complicated you are. I'm British. Yes, you are. This is China.
Changcheng Station, built by the Japanese in the 1930s. Here, steam engines outnumber diesels or electric 2 to 1, with steam working both passenger and freight services. Last year saw the production of the final Chinese-built steam locomotive, but in Changcheng at least, there's still 20 more years of steam to enjoy before the diesel wins the fight. These bold black dinosaurs weigh 130 or more tons, are fed from an 85-ton tender and are driven by pistons responding to steam at a pressure of 220 pounds per square inch. Lovely, obvious, teeth-clenching power, as beautiful as the muscles of a thoroughbred horse, snorting, baying, alive. We arrive in Changcheng 17 hours after leaving Beijing. Perhaps we're a little conservative in our method of leaving the train. Changcheng was the final capital of Imperial China when Puyi, the last emperor, was set up by the Japanese as the puppet ruler. The city is now twinned with Birmingham, thanks to my father's enthusiasm for steam engines. But in railway terms, it's the Swindon of China. And the engine factory is the Mecca of steam. This is a step back into living industrial archaeology. A Dickensian world of dirt and darkness where the engines of Manchuria come every 120,000 miles to be stripped to the bone and rebuilt as new.
Shall we go to talk to them, right?
I think they're having a break, no?
Oh, yeah.
Do they work on one engine all the way through?
所以每一台车你都是干同样的活，比方说电焊工老是焊，
对，
比方修的老是修，可能修很多。
我们就是一个部位，我们一个班组就干一个部位。
They do the same sort of job, and they work on different engines.
Every day.
每天都这么干，
每天都是，每天的动态是2台车。
每天2台车哈。Yes, every day. Must be very, very hard work and tedious. 你说的间隙是不是跟那板儿？
在这俩板之间的间隙。
啊 the gap between the, you see that plate? Yeah. Yeah. Well,
哎，这没有
then
间
he
就行
points
了。
to us.
Yes.
Oh, it's like a fish plate, really.
This apparent casualness to safety belies an old-fashioned but exacting standard of railway engineering. At Changcheng's locomotive depot, the engines receive their everyday maintenance. China still has vast resources of coal, and with an underused labour force, work-intensive steam engines are still a very practical proposition. These are the QJ210-2 class engines, the newest design and the biggest and strongest in China, made to replace Japanese-built engines from the 1940s. Engine number 120 still operates under the old Chinese crew system.
Can you work out the date? 65. Yes. 65. July 1965.
I think they're repairing the wheel rim, getting on the outer casing. Well, it needs it.
是不是特别对铁路对机车有特殊的感情啊？
有。
Yes.
And quite right too. She's beautiful.
Under the old system, these men are paired with one engine for their working life. Each locomotive has 3 three-man crews working 8-hour shifts, driving her, repairing her, personally supervising every restoration, living her, breathing her, loving her. The newer westernized system, unfortunately becoming more and more common, means crews are allotted a different engine each shift and consequently don't care as much. If the engines could speak, I know which system they'd prefer. The tender of this RM Pacific carries 7,000 gallons of water, enough for 150 miles. It takes well over 1 ton of coal to fire the engine each day, and the 10 tons of coal in the tender are enough for 1 day's work, always depending, of course, on the gradients, the skill of the driver, and the enthusiasm of the fireman. The British introduced the railway to China in 1876, beating strong opposition from 5 other countries competing for trading concessions, and even stronger resistance from the Chinese themselves. The first steam engine to arrive in China was called the Pioneer, built by Ransom and Rapier of Ipswich in 1874. It ran with 2 other locomotives, appropriately called Celestial Empire and Flowery Land, along a 10-mile line built near Shanghai. But the Chinese tore up the Foreign Devil's track 2 years later. By 1906, Manchuria had been invaded by the Japanese, who built a railway system to enable them to move their coal and their troops. The Japanese rail system remained until the end of World War II. When Mao Zedong came into power, one of his first priorities was to enlarge the railways. Until today, there's a 40,000-mile network of rail and another 3,000 miles planned. Trains are here to stay. Hours train time north of Changchun, just 200 miles from the Russian border, is Langshan, where another kind of railway supports the whole economy. In Langshan, the forestry industry would die without narrow-gauge steam. Langshan has a population of 80,000 people. It's a thriving little town, benefiting from the return of free enterprise after the austerity and turbulence of the Cultural Revolution. Locals sell their wares in free markets on the street. Though prices are still firmly controlled by law, diligent people can make a profit. But life in the far north is still cold and bleak, especially during the long, hard winters. And though the city dweller envies his peasant brother his money, he wouldn't really change places. The Cultural Revolution stopped all reforestation in the 1970s, so China's forestry railways had to extend further every year to reach the tree line. Now, sense has prevailed, and for every tree cut down, another is planted. This section of 2-foot 6-inch narrow-gauge logging railway stretches into the 650,000 acres of forest for 100 miles, with another 30 miles of branch lines and sidings, all to collect the felled trees and bring them back to the sawmill and the main line railhead. AM Langshan engine sheds and ablutions for a Hungarian-built 080 class narrow-gauge engine, and anything else which needs sprucing up.
Goodness, they're really early starters, aren't they?
Look at the old people around
So
here.
they're just taking stuff up for today or for people up on the farms?
Well, somewhat.
I
I think just for today.
I can't get
Because
used to their stuffing the live animals in sacks. I'm sorry, I just can't. I hate it.
it's not allowed to carry wild animal on the train.
Western scruples are not understood by the Chinese, who just see us as soft. Really, this is just another commuter train, taking the majority of workers up to the trees in the morning and home again at night. It was in the late 1940s that people were brought up from the south to live in and harvest the northern forests. Most of the tourist narrow-gauge lines in Britain started life like this, as a linchpin to the local economy. Sturdy, solid and reliable, and supporting a people who couldn't survive without them. That's the magic of China. A living, working place where life is hard and basic and nothing hides that fact. The Chinese are not sentimental. When the time comes, they'll move happily to diesel and scrap their steam. But one more generation will live and work with these faithful, beautiful giants before they die forever. At least the sheds of Changchun guarantee another 20 years of life.